After much deliberation around the community, we are now giving our first looks, our first impressions to the power of the tier sets for Season 3. Now, we don't have nearly enough knowledge, of course, to be very precise with this. Look at the, the pre-Aberrus min-maxing done around the tier sets. Obviously, our knowledge right now for the Season 3 tier sets is much more into Filicraft territory. So we are just guessing right now. We're just trying to compare the current tier set power that you have with the new tier set power that you will get, to see if if it's gonna be a gain or if it's gonna be a loss, depending on how powerful the tier sets are looking. As you can see, we do have a question mark tier. This tier is reserved for the specs about to be reworked in the patch, so not much reason to talk about the Havoc Demon Hunter tier if they are about to receive a whole bunch of changes to their talents, for example. Same goes for the other rogue specs going under the same type of rework. So we can start with the DK specs. The DK specs are a trio of meh, but for different reasons. The meh coming for Blood is because their current tier is already meh, it's already bad, while this new tier is slightly better and does give you some agency in the fact that you can proc it by yourself whenever you use a bomb limb, rather than having to rely on the RNG chance of consuming a bone shield. It still does not look very exciting overall. Even less exciting the fact that Blood for now has no planned changes on the PTR. Instead, what is meh about Frost is the fact that this tier was quite powerful, centered around Frostworm's Fury. This one, first of all, will force you to use a talent you don't use, which is Chill Streak, and it will have the majority of its power centered around AoE damage. Once more, really, because this tier already was centered around AoE. So not too much is changing about Frost. If anything, we can perhaps give it a bit of a thumbs up, mostly because at least you get to change your rotation a little bit more, because you get to use Chill Streak, but that's about it. Meanwhile, the disappointment level of Unholy is mostly because at the moment, right now in Season 2, Unholy has one of the strongest tiers in the game, and it's getting changed because, in case you're not aware, Blizzard wants to change the damage profile of Unholy and no longer make it very bursty. And this new tier shows you exactly what it is by basically removing any type of burst damage whatsoever. All you do now is summoning an extra Magus of the Dead, and that's about it. Give you at best 5% more damage. So it definitely no longer gonna be the type of super high spiky damage with massive downtimes of little damage for Unholy, with a change in playstyle, which some players might enjoy, but at the very least in terms of power gain, this doesn't look nearly as big of a change for Unholy. Now, skipping the under construction Demon Hunter, we have Druid. Druid finds itself with a good change for Balance, a possibly even better change for Feral, mediocre change for Guardian Druid, and disappointing change for Resto. Now, going one by one, the changes to Balance and Feral are good because their current tiers in Season 2 were centered around quite the RNG passive elements or just passive damage. Like, for example, flat out increasing the damage of your Sunfire and Moonfire, by 20%, and that's it. Or Feral Druid having a chance with your auto attacks to gain a buff to just increase your agility by 1%. Not really very exciting. In this new tier, Balance is gaining an actual effect they can control and play around whenever Eclipse ends by giving you faster cast time. One of the things you can feel the most as part of your rotation is when you get more haste, when you cast faster. So this is a definite good change to the rotation of Balance. Same goes for Feral, because now the damage buff increase they gain, the 20% damage increase, the cooldown reduction, as well as the extra dot damage, is all centered around Feral Frenzy, which is, again, a button you press. So it's under your control. So not only both of the tiers look good in terms of damage, but they also give you more agency. They are no longer as tied by RNG or by simply being boring, passive, flat-out damage increases. Guardian Druid is more towards the middle, not because this is very weak, but mostly because this one was very strong. especially the max HP increased by 15%, synergizing very well with their mastery, was a good bit of defensiveness. This one is not nearly as big in terms of defensive power, but it is slightly stronger in terms of damage, in terms of DPS. So they still are more or less just as S tier as they currently are, which is more or less what most Guardian Druids will care about. Who of the Druids is a bit more disappointing is Resto Druid. This is also somewhat expected given that this tier was extremely powerful. Both the flat out but boring 12% healing increase to Reju, which is very good, and also the very big power increase to your Flourish. Now Flourish is getting giga nerfed in 10.2, and the change to Resto is all around Grove Guardians, and extra healing to your Grove Guardians, as well as more single target healing bonuses. Clear casting now causes Regrowth and Nourish to heal more targets, so we're talking about single target heals, we're talking about spot healing and no longer just very powerful AoE healing abilities, as Blizzard points out want to reduce in the next patch. Either way, it's definitely a bit disappointing. If we just have to flat out look at their current power in Season 2, it's just a weaker tier, at the very least at first glance. Talking about weaker tier, this is a bit more of a question mark for both Devastation and Preservation. We don't have Augmentation, but if we had it, you know, take an image in your mind, this is where Augmentation is. The thing for Augmentation is that their current tier is quite average, and this tier is also average, with the slightly increased quality of life of being able to have a third prescience up every 3 you cast because of the double duration on the 2-piece set bonus, but that's about it. It's not really going to change anything about Augmentation. Devastation and Preservation are a bit more decisive in what they change. Devastation is unlike Unholy, which abandons the power of their burst damage, because the 2-piece set bonus gives you upwards of 25% more damage inside of your Dragon Rage, which is your biggest burst window. What is even stronger is that Emerald Trance can stack up 5 times, and when Dragon Rage ends, this trance will persist for 5 seconds per stack, meaning that if you stack it to max, this 25% damage increase will persist for 25 more seconds. So even just by first glance, if anything, this perhaps is even higher. This perhaps looks even more promising. The only thing that maybe still puts it here is the fact that right now, Devastation has one of the strongest tiers in the game in Aberrus. That's perhaps the only reason as to not think it this strong right now. Preservation is definitely not here, but it's still a very solid tier set. You lose a lot of your current playstyle around landing massive Spirit Blooms, but you do gain a lot more different and diverse playstyles around Living Flame. Now both being able to land 10 plus Living Flames on multiple players because they will hit all of your empowered targets, and also giving more value and giving you again a reason to cast Living Flame on enemies, because now casting it on enemies has a chance to spawn an echo on a nearby ally. So you still gain something as a healer by doing damage, which is something all healers should have nowadays. But definitely overall it still looks like quite the good tier. Talking about quite the good tiers, we have Hunter, and Hunter starts out with an S tier Beast Mastery, a still pretty good tier Survival, and, you know, a bit of a more average tier Marksmanship. Starting with the average, we have Marksmanship. The current tier of Marksmanship is both of a bonus in both AoE and single target, because it can buff multiple abilities usable in both single target or AoE, but this tier is almost exclusively AoE damage, spawning volley at the target, and then all of the targets hit by volley have a chance to be hit by wind arrows. This is clearly more valuable in AoE and much weaker in single target. For Survival, it's not like that. Survival had a pretty powerful tier right now, focused around Wildfire Bombs. This one focuses around Fury of the Eagle, while still giving you a whole bunch of Wildfire Bomb buffs. Quite powerful ones even, especially when you consider that Fury of the Eagle can be reduced in cooldown when you reset kill command, so the 45-second cooldown of Fury of the Eagle can be brought all the way down below a 30-second cooldown. So being able to, every 30 seconds, get a free wildfire bomb cast, get a free charge of wildfire bomb, increase the damage of all your wildfire bombs by 40% for 12 seconds, it's a very good addition for Survival Hunter. But then we have to talk about the best of the three, which is Beast Mastery. Beast Mastery is already on a pretty powerful tier right now, actually. However, this tier, while not looking super powerful at first glance, look at this, very few words. How can a tier set be powerful when it has such few words? Look at this, look at how many words, look at how many words, and then look at this, so little. However, because of the changes they received in their Talent 3, the synergy around spawning extra beasts, spawning extra pets has skyrocketed for Beast Mastery Hunter, and this alone is something ridiculous, like 8-9% damage increase just with this, not even to mention the 4-piece set bonus. So right now, at the very least, it looks like a very powerful tier for Beast Mastery Hunter. We don't stop the very powerful tier at first glance list, because we go over to Paladin, and Red Paladin is amongst the good ones. Who is a little bit more average is Holy, and who is a little bit more disappointing, you know, is Prot Paladin. So starting from the disappointing is Prot. The saving grace of Prot is that their current tier is already very disappointing, but at the very least it doesn't change your playstyle, it doesn't make it actively frustrating to play around, so it's whatever. However, this one makes it actively annoying to play around. This entire thing is going to buff your consecration, your next consecration, by increasing the damage and the healing by 200%, the radius by 30%, and while you stay inside this giga consecration, you have a 20% basically extra damage or healing. Now, the problem is of course that Prot Paladins move around quite a bit, tanks move around quite a bit. Prot Paladins cast consecration almost on cooldown, as they have to, you know, kite enemies, kite bolstering, run away from storming, run away from sanguine. You will be having to cast and move around, cast consecration quite often. So having an entire tier centered around standing inside this consecration and not moving, and having to keep track on which of the consecrations are you empowering and then staying in it, does not look like fun gameplay for a tank. I'm sure it's gonna be chill and relaxed in the raid, but this is not the type of playstyle that you wanna have in Mythic Plus. If you really wanted to make this fun in Mythic Plus, this should have followed with "and your consecration now circles around you and follows you around." If that was a change, then this tier might have become a little bit better, but for now it's quite an annoying one to play around. Then we have the change to Holy Paladin. Holy Paladin already has a pretty decent tier, pretty strong 2-piece, so much so that you want to even focus Crit Strike now as a Holy Paladin to synergize with this buff. This change in 10.2 is good, reducing the cooldown of Daybreak to have the same cooldown of Divine Toll, with the talent to reduce it to 45 seconds. Now they both have a 45-second cooldown, so it's very synergistic. The 2-piece will depend a lot on the actual numbers before we actually know how powerful this is. So on first glance, it's an okay tier. Who goes above and beyond is Ret. This entire thing just straight up looks very powerful. What's even better is that the current tier of Ret is much more boring to play around. It's just a very straightforward damage increase type of buff without you really having to change too much around how you play. This one though, it's like a domino, it's like a matryoshka of mechanics. First you have to play around Blade of Justice, and then Expurgation, and then you have to cast your Judgment or Divine Toll on a target with Expurgation, and then when you do, you gain Wrathful Sanction, which will splash 20% of the damage to nearby enemies, and then once you gain Wrathful Sanction on an enemy, you gain Echoes of Wrath, which will cause your next spender to deal damage a second time at 50% effectiveness without consuming the damage increase of Judgment. So it's like a mega combo of like 4 or 5 different things all together. and all in all, it looks very powerful right now for Red Paladin. Then we have mages. So mages are here for different reasons. I would put them around here, but you know, for example, the difference between these two. Fire Mage right now has a pretty powerful tier. It's not in the top, top 5 of damage increases, but it's still a solid one. This one is very powerful. It gives you exactly what you want. You want more damage inside of combustion because it's your burst window. 4-piece set bonus gives you 30% more damage inside of combustion. So just by the damage increase alone, this should be an S tier set. The reason why you might find it a bit more down the line is because of how passive it is. You literally play as if this tier did not exist. You change absolutely nothing in your rotation, nothing different will happen when you get your hands on a tier. You will be the exact same spec, just with a higher number. Some players really like that, others do not. I will leave it up to you. How would you feel about a tier set like that? It does change for Arcane. Arcane does already have a pretty powerful tier, but it has quite some complicated min-maxing to be done around the mana spend and the buffs given after the mana spent. This one is a bit more fun to play around. You consume clear casting to do more damage, and after you consume 6 of them, you get a mega damage increase arcane missile in AoE, hitting up to, I think, 5 targets all at once. This is a much more fun tier. It's much more entertaining. You get this, this loop of getting excited, releasing some dopamine as you see the amount of clear casting going up to 4, and then 5, and then 6 when you can finally land your mega powerful arcane missiles. It's a fun loop for a tier. We will have to see the actual damage numbers of this tier though to see how effective it is. The one who is a bit more average is Frost, mostly because it's a very similar tier to what they already have, just swapping the names around. The current tier gives Flurry a splash damage around, and then gives Ice Lance a chance to trigger Brain Freeze. The new tier in the patch will give Glacial Spike a chance to trigger Brain Freeze, not Ice Lance, and will give Glacial Spike a splashing damage around nearby enemies instead of Flurry. So it's basically the same tier, except now you are playing around Glacial Spike. It's better because you're adding something extra to the rotation. You're no longer spamming as few buttons as before, or at the very least, one button you use. Glacial Spike is now much stronger. If anything, slightly more exciting because the current tier of Frost is amongst the weakest in terms of damage increase. So maybe this one will be a bit stronger. Talking about being a bit stronger, we enter Monk territory. Monk is it's a spread. Monk is a spread. The spread to the bottom is Windwalker. The tier is just bad. It's also not very fun to play around, and what is even more disappointing is that players were not only expecting a good tier for Windwalker, but also expecting some changes, some balance tuning changes for Windwalker. Well, these are not coming, at the very least right now. It does seem needlessly complicated. It doesn't seem like the damage increase is that much, and to make it worse, the current tier of Windwalker is above 10% damage increase, which means it's on the high end of damage increases for tiers. So not a very good first impression of the Windwalker tier. Complete opposite of the first impression of the Brewmaster tier. This thing is busted. Both the damage increase and the defensiveness of this talent are very strong. Even just this part. Each Celestial Brew also grants a stagger absorb equal to the amount of Shadow Flame damage you have dealt. Is already massive because of the amount of DPS you do as a Brewmaster Monk, which is very high. And the fact that the 4-piece itself gives you a chance to do extra damage as Shadow Flame, further empowering the amount of stagger absorb of Celestial Brew. Not to mention the 2-piece itself doing more Shadow Flame damage and more healing over time. So this is just a very powerful tier, at the very least at first glance, for Brewmaster Monk. Who is a bit more in the middle is Mistweaver. So the first release of the tier would have put them here. Unfortunately, the tier has already been nerfed. So it's no longer nearly as powerful because now it's only Renewing Mist granting this buff. It's no longer the free jumps of Renewing Mist. So the potential power of this 50% healing increase is being reduced significantly, which still makes this a good tier, right? Let's not get it confused, but not nearly as powerful as it looked at first glance. Then we move over to Priest. So for Priest, we have a pretty good set for healers. We have noticed most of the healers being quite good with one exception. And then you have the lower down Shadow. It will be up to preference, honestly. For Shadow, it is mostly because this one will give some more value to a button you have not been pressing very often recently, which is Shadow Ward Pain. So the 2-piece might be slightly annoying because it pushes you to play Shadow Ward Death even more than before. It does become stronger as an execute type of spec even more now with this 2-piece. But the cool and interactive thing is that the more you Shadow Ward Death, the more stacks of Death Torment you gain, and the more damage you will do with your next cast of these two abilities. The cast gets improved and empowered by a lot. We are talking about 3000% more damage of Shadow Ward Pain or 600% more damage of Shadow Crush. So it does have a pretty cool payoff. Sort of like we talked about Arcane and counting the clear casting stacks until the moment you can land the mega arcane missiles. Same goes for Shadow Priest. Honestly, casting an empowered Shadow Ward Pain with basically no animation is a little bit less cool than casting 5 targets arcane missiles like Arcane will be doing, but still, it does look like it has some more variety in the build of Shadow Priest. Then you have Discipline and Holy. For Discipline, we have gotten the change where Shadow Covenant is now activated by Mindbender or Shadow Fiend. This means that now when you activate Mindbender, you gain Shadow Covenant and your Smite casts twice. Smite reduces the cooldown of Mindbender. So casting Smite twice in one will even further reduce the cooldown of Mindbender. You will be able to cast Mindbender more often, which will put you into Shadow Covenant, which will allow you to double cast Smite to reduce the cooldown of Mindbender, to use it more often, to activate Shadow Covenant more often, to double cast Smite more often, rinse and repeat. It's a very good loop for Discipline Priest. Not to mention, of course, the synergy of double casting Smite and therefore double extending the duration of Atonement on 2 different targets or on the same target twice. It's just a very good synergy for Discipline. Yes, you do lose something extremely powerful in Aberrus, which is the no cast time Radiance. That's a very good help for the quality of life of Discipline, but this one still looks quite strong. Same goes for Holy, especially the 4-piece. Being able to get free charges of your AoE heal, not consume a charge, and cost less mana, and allowing you to save them, to save the stacks up, waiting for the big AoE ability and cast them both at once. On top of that, casting both of them now gives you 5 seconds of renew on all the allies being hit. This makes it a very good tier for Holy Priest as well. Talking about good tiers, we have Resto Shaman, we then also have Elemental Shaman, and then we also have Enhancement Shaman. Now, Enhancement is up to preference. To some players, Enhancement might actually go here. The reason for that is that Enhancement is more or less going away from the slot machine RNG type of build centered around spamming Stormstrike non-stop. This will now be focusing around Primordial Wave cooldown reduction, and using and summoning a whole bunch of Spheral Spirits to give you a damage increase. So for the players who were getting kind of bored of the RNG build, this is a good thing. Then you have Elemental and Restoration. So Elemental is here because of a good change in terms of playstyle. Now you play more around Primordial Wave. This gives you a free cast of Elemental Blast with all of the buffs included. So it's a very feel-good button to press. Right now, Primordial Wave doesn't feel very good for Elemental, but with this change it will feel like a very chunky, satisfying spell to use. And more importantly, and the reason why they are here is because of this. After using Primordial Wave, whenever you consume your Lava Surge, your next lightning casts are instant and deal more damage. This part in particular is very good. I am sure to tell you, as an ex-Elemental player myself, the enjoyment Elemental players will have at the notion they can now free cast while moving way more often. Not being stuck, being a turret nearly as much because of the amount of procs of instacast lava bursts, also giving you instacast lightning bolts will be a godsend in many situations for an elemental shaman. Obviously, this might all crumble into a disaster because the damage increase is terrible and the spec will be awful, but at the very least, especially because of the quality of life change, it's a very good set for elemental. Now, perhaps overall this tier might actually be even weaker than this and this and this. The reason why they can be here is because their current tier is the weakest out of all of the healers. So the gap from their old tier to this new one will be one of the largest ones, especially in the raid. Mythic Plus, not nearly as powerful, but in the raid, the potential of spreading Riptide is massive. You can direct heal a target to tag them with Tidal Reservoir and then Riptide them. A target with Tidal Reservoir healed by Riptide has a 10% chance to spawn a new Riptide. So you then go and chain heal that new target to buff them with Tidal Reservoir. So now they have Tidal Reservoir and Riptide, which means they have a 10% chance to spawn a new Riptide. And you can then continue to do this. This can skyrocket your usage of Riptides out on any targets from 3 at a time that you have now up to 10 or even 12 at a time that you can have in this patch, which is even further empowered by talents like this one, healing more the more Riptides you have out. At the moment this talent is garbage, but in 10.2 with this set it will be made much stronger. We then have the last two of the classes, Warlock and Warrior. So we start with Warlock. Warlock, we have Affliction, and then we have Demo and Destro. So Affliction could be here as well. Affliction's problem is that when you read the tier, you wonder, okay, but where is Seed of Corruption? Soul Rot buffs my Malefic Rapture. Soul Rot buffs my damage, Soul Rot extends my dots. With Malefic Rapture, that's all good. This is an S tier single target tier set. However, where is the buff to Seed of Corruption when I am in AoE? There is none. So in AoE, this tier is basically here. So as long as we don't get a change, then the tier is just average, because it's very good in single target but very poor in AoE. If they do get the addition of Seed in this 4-piece, then it becomes much more powerful. Destro and Demo are just boring and bland, especially Destro. In the current season, you have been pushed towards using Channel Demon Fire as your new main ability. In here, you will be pushed more towards Dimensional Rift. None of this is very fun. None of this changes anything. You don't have anything new to press, anything new to play around, as we mentioned, nothing like Arcane, nothing like Elemental, nothing really to look forward to. It's just a more incinerate spam into dumping Soul Shards with Chaos Bolt over and over and over, even once you get your hands on this tier. So quite disappointing. The reason why Demo is even lower down is because this tier is just an abomination. For two reasons. Reason number one, Demo has currently the second or so strongest tier in the game. So they go from something very strong and also very thematic, buffing your demons, to something that has basically nothing to do with demons. Something that gives you a second type of Doom ability. And imagine how bad it is when you don't even use your current Doom talent and Blizzard gives you a Doom talent extra. That's just poor. And just the way it's gonna work, especially in Mythic Plus with this super long priming time, even if it can be reduced by a bit, it's still just way too long and way too clunky to play around. And more importantly, as mentioned, it does not play around your pets, your demons, anything of the sort. So it's just an all-in-all and overall disappointing set for Demo. Lastly, we have Warrior. For Warrior... For Warrior, we are putting Prot Warrior amongst the disappointing ones. We're also putting Fury amongst the decent ones. Same goes for Arms. They are here for different reasons. Arms is here because of something we mentioned already, the problem of Arms Warriors to dump Rage and the bad nerf they received, so that now Ignore Pain no longer counts towards all of their talents, giving them buffs when they are consuming Rage. This is very good, because this one giving you procs of sudden death means even more ways to dump rage, because now you can press execute more often, meaning you can dump rage more often. Also, what's even better is that the 4-piece set bonus will allow you to have execute to create a second bleed, so this will stack twice, both of the original deep wounds bleed plus the extra bleed of this 4-piece set bonus. And overall, and the main reason why they stay here, is because of the rage dump feature of the 2-piece set bonus. It would have been cooler if they gave them a rage dump feature which actually made them press more than just 3 buttons in their rotation, but I know, we are talking about arms, that's asking a little bit too much. Meanwhile, Fury is here because they move, or rather Blizzard is trying once again to move Fury away from just spamming Raging Blow and ignoring Bloodthirst. They already tried in this season to do this by giving your Rampage buffs to your Bloodthirst, but it wasn't enough. So now they double down. Now they make your Odin's Fury buff your next 3 Bloodthirsts. Also, your Bloodthirst crits reduce the cooldown of Odin's Fury, so you can press Odin's Fury more, so you can buff your Bloodthirst more, so they can crit and reduce the cooldown and rinse and repeat. So at the very least now you have yet another attempt to get you to press a different button every once in a while in Bloodthirst. The last one is also the more disappointing one, which is Prot Warrior. Disappointing for 2 reasons. Number 1, the current tier of Prot is very strong, so you would be expecting something to match. And number 2, this is not really very powerful. You are already using Shield Slam very often anyways without having to be enticed by this 2-piece to use it more. The 4-piece set bonus with the cooldown reduction of Thunderous Roar is also not very relevant. You are already using Thunderous Roar basically 1 every other Mythic Plus pool, so this 5 to 10 seconds or more cooldown reduction won't really change the importance of this cooldown in Mythic Plus, for example. And more importantly, the damage. You are losing a lot of damage compared to what you get right now. This one gives you a decent single target damage increase. You are practically gaining no damage reduction, no strength in AoE defensiveness, because this one has your Shield Slam reducing the target's damage dealt, the primary target damage dealt by 10%, but what about the other 15 mobs you're fighting in Mythic Plus, for example? Like the 4-piece you have right now, for example, which empowers your Shield Slam to create a shockwave, reducing the damage dealt of all enemies by 5%. This one is lacking in that regard. So overall, compared to their current power, it's just a flat-out weaker tier for Protection Warrior. So after this entire marathon, this is all we have when it comes to the current first look and first impressions power of the tiers in 10.2. We still have some question marks left to answer as soon as we see a few more details about these changes, but that's how things are looking at the very least right now, without having the full-on details of exactly how much power down to the very percentage of numbers all these tiers are giving. We will keep this in mind as we go deeper down in the PTR and we keep seeing the changes to both the balance tuning of the specs as well as the changes to the tiers. And we will see just how much this will change right before the release of the patch. So, with this way too long of a video out of the way, it's now finally time to leave each other. So leaving each other, starting by the goodbyes to our dear Patreon supporters for the contribution and help to the growth of the channel. You can still of course do it completely for free. You can like and comment down below as well as subscribe to the channel itself. So with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, well, it was coming. I knew it was gonna be a long one, and it went more or less just about as bad as I expected.